The Red Sea shimmered under the midday sun, deceptively calm. Beneath its surface, tension had been brewing for months. Ever since the Houthis ramped up their attacks on commercial vessels transiting through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the United States Navy had maintained a watchful presence, but this was different. This time, it wasn't about deterrence. It was about action. Aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, Commander Ethan Rourke stared at the digital projection before him. The target, Ras Isa, a sprawling oil terminal in western Yemen, now under full Houthi control. Intelligence analysts had traced fuel revenue from the port directly to arms smuggling networks operated by Iranian-backed militias. The port, once a civilian hub, had become a vital node in the logistics chain fueling regional instability. Ethan knew what this meant. A strike on the terminal would send a message, but it would also risk escalation. He had flown combat missions over Iraq and Syria, but Yemen was a different beast. Fluid loyalties, overlapping conflicts, and an enemy that didn't fear death. He exhaled slowly. Orders were orders. In the belly of the carrier, two FA-18 Super Hornets, call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2, were armed with JDAMs, precision-guided munitions designed for surgical destruction. The pilots, Lieutenant Commander Mark Dice Harrelson and Lieutenant Tara Shade Owens, ran their final checks. "This isn't just a fuel depot," Dice muttered through the intercom. "We're lighting a powder keg." Shade didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on the mission profile. "It's already burning, Dice. We're just shaping the fire." Within minutes, the jets were airborne, roaring into the endless blue sky. Their flight path had been meticulously planned to avoid civilian zones and minimize radar exposure. Midway through, a KC-135 Stratotanker provided an aerial refuel, extending their reach and endurance. Every movement was monitored from CENTCOM in Tampa to satellite relays over the Arabian Peninsula. As they neared the Yemeni coast, the terrain below shifted from ochre sands to rocky escarpments and dense urban sprawl. The port loomed ahead, vast fuel tanks, loading cranes, and what looked like makeshift radar installations. Houthi patrol boats floated idle at the edges, unaware of the storm coming from above. "Target lock confirmed," Shade announced calmly. Her finger hovered over the release switch. "Standing by for go code." Back on the carrier, Rourke listened to the silence before the storm. Then the command came from above. "Execute." "Viper 1, weapons away," Dice confirmed. In synchronized unison, the JDAMs detached from their mounts and streaked downward with blistering speed. Seconds later, twin eruptions shattered the stillness. Flames engulfed the fuel silos, sending towers of black smoke spiraling into the sky. Shockwaves rippled through the compound, igniting secondary explosions, likely ammunition stores buried beneath camouflaged bunkers. Shade banked hard to avoid the fireball, adrenaline surging. "Direct hit," she confirmed. "Target neutralized." From high-altitude surveillance drones, the damage was evident. Half the port lay in ruin. Crippled cranes leaned at awkward angles, their metal frames twisted. The glow from burning fuel cast a ghostly light across the coastline as civilians in nearby villages watched from rooftops. Back aboard the Eisenhower, Rourke stood silent for a long moment. The mission had gone flawlessly. Yet something gnawed at him. Not a sense of guilt, but of anticipation. The Houthis were silent, but they wouldn't remain so for long. In Washington, news of the strike broke before the jets had even returned. Headlines blared, "U.S. targets Houthi oil network, retaliation for Red Sea attacks." Cable news anchors speculated on Iran's response. Oil prices began inching upward within hours. At CENTCOM, analysts pored over satellite images, noting that the attack had struck not just fuel tanks, but what appeared to be a recently constructed communications array. That hadn't been part of the original intelligence. Was it dual use, or had the Houthis buried something deeper beneath the port? Questions spiraled faster than answers could form. Shade and Dice landed back on the carrier in silence. The mission was done, but the unease lingered. As they removed their helmets and debriefed, neither spoke of victory, only of what might come next. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the Eisenhower's deck. Crews moved efficiently, refueling jets, prepping for whatever came next. Rourke looked out over the sea and thought of all the variables no briefing could cover: regional politics, retaliatory strikes, civilian blowback. The strike had been precise, the message unambiguous. But in the Middle East, clarity was often an illusion. The satellite footage came in like a drumbeat, frame by frame, slow and foreboding. At CENTCOM's analysis room, intelligence officers clustered around the digital wall, scrubbing through high-resolution images of the destroyed Ras Isa port. At first glance, it looked like a decisive victory. The flames had engulfed half the depot, and the fuel silos were beyond repair. But something deeper began to emerge beneath the smoke and chaos. In the lower quadrant of the final drone feed, buried behind a stack of what appeared to be oil drums, a strange geometric pattern glinted, metallic, compact, and nothing like industrial storage. The analysts paused. "That's a SAM battery," someone muttered, "hidden in plain sight." Within the hour, a classified report reached the Pentagon. The Houthis hadn't just been refining and selling oil, they had weaponized the port. Underneath the cargo hangars and rusting containers, they'd concealed Iranian-made surface-to-air missile systems, likely smuggled through Al-Hudaydah under forged manifests. The oil facility had doubled as a defensive outpost, designed to launch strikes against Western aircraft in the region. That discovery changed everything. Aboard the Eisenhower, Commander Rourke absorbed the new intel in silence. Shade and Dice stood beside him in the operations room, watching the imagery scroll past. The deeper implications weren't lost on any of them. This wasn't just about oil revenue anymore. This was proof of Iranian escalation. The port had been a chess piece in a much larger game, and the strike had just knocked it off the board. But retaliation came faster than expected. 3 hours after the last plume of smoke had cleared, alarms screamed across the ship's early warning systems. 2 incoming drones, low-flying and fast, targeted the Eisenhower's strike group from the Yemeni coastline. One was intercepted by a CRAM system in a blaze of tracer rounds. The second got closer, too close, before exploding in mid-air just 50 meters off the bow of the USS Laboon, shaking the deck and showering it with shrapnel. No casualties, but the message was clear. The Houthis were no longer hiding in the shadows. They were challenging the U.S. Navy directly. Inside the carrier's planning room, Rourke gathered his pilots and intel officers. His voice was measured, but the tension in the air was thick. "We struck their oil revenue. Now they're aiming for ours, our presence, our control, our credibility." Shade leaned forward, eyes sharp. "They're not just retaliating, they're escalating deliberately. They want to draw us in." Dice nodded, still nursing a burn on his flight glove from the heat of the cockpit earlier. "This wasn't about drones, it's about narrative. They want to turn us into occupiers." Meanwhile, halfway across the world in Tehran, a statement was released by the Iranian Foreign Ministry. "The U.S. continues to violate Yemeni sovereignty under false pretenses. Any harm to Yemen will be answered in kind." The language was veiled but unmistakable. A red line had been crossed. Back in Washington, officials scrambled to coordinate with allies. British and French vessels in the region were placed on alert. Commercial tankers were advised to reroute south around the Horn of Africa. The Red Sea, once a lifeline of global commerce, was now a boiling cauldron. CENTCOM ordered an immediate expansion of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, missions over western Yemen. Reaper drones circled Ras Isa, gathering post-strike data, while electronic warfare planes monitored Houthi comms for signs of further attacks. What they intercepted chilled the room. "They say the Americans hit civilians," one analyst translated. "They're broadcasting it across tribal networks." But there had been no civilian casualties, at least not according to the mission log or drone footage. The Houthis were using the strike as propaganda, twisting the narrative for regional sympathy and international condemnation. Rourke stared at the grainy clip of a Houthi spokesman waving a tattered child's blanket near the charred remains of a fuel tank. "They're building a myth," he said. "One we have to dismantle before it spreads." But myths were powerful. Across Arab social media, hashtags accusing the U.S. of war crimes began trending. News outlets, starved for footage, looped the same shaky clip of the port ruins, cut with interviews from local residents. Some real, others likely staged. The story was mutating, and the facts were losing ground. Shade knew this battlefield well. Before flying jets, she had served in psychological operations in northern Iraq. "If we don't control the narrative now, we'll be playing defense politically, even if we win militarily." She wasn't wrong. In the days that followed, the strike's tactical success was overshadowed by strategic uncertainty. Oil prices rose by 4%. NATO members debated whether to publicly support further strikes. China and Russia condemned the U.S. action, calling it reckless interference. The Eisenhower strike group remained on high alert, cycling pilots in and out of reconnaissance patrols, expecting the next retaliation to come by sea, sky, or through information warfare. And still, no one knew exactly what else had been hiding beneath Ras Isa. The sea was calm, deceptively so. Beneath the surface, tension swirled like undercurrents waiting to drag the unwary into darkness. On board the USS Eisenhower, the air was dense with unease. Every conversation was clipped, every footstep deliberate. Commander Rourke stood alone on the bridge, staring through binoculars at the horizon, where the shimmer of dawn gave the illusion of peace. But peace, he knew, was a fragile illusion. He turned as footsteps approached. Shade and Dice had returned from a surveillance mission, still suited in their flight gear, faces streaked with salt and fatigue. Rourke didn't waste time. "What did you see?" Shade's jaw clenched. "They're repositioning, not retreating, repositioning. Mobile units, probably relocating the remaining SAMs into civilian areas." Dice dropped into the nearest chair, helmet still in hand. "They're using human shields. They know we won't hit those zones." Rourke's silence confirmed the worst. The Houthis had learned quickly. The port strike had sent a shockwave through their command, but it hadn't broken them. Instead, it had taught them how the U.S. fought, and more importantly, what it wouldn't do. The White House released a statement later that afternoon, calling the mission a measured act of deterrence. But in Yemen, the Houthis labeled it an act of war. Their broadcasts grew bolder, their threats sharper. By the following morning, the next phase had begun. 3 U.S.-flagged commercial vessels, unaware of the rising danger, entered the southern Red Sea under the assumption that the American naval presence guaranteed their safety. But one of them, the MV Liberty Star, didn't make it through unscathed. A small skiff emerged from a fishing convoy, launching 2 RPGs at the vessel's hull. One missed, one struck. The damage was minimal, but symbolically devastating. Suddenly, the conflict wasn't limited to jets and ports. It had spilled into global trade. In the Situation Room, advisors debated escalation. Some argued for a broader bombing campaign to dismantle the Houthis' logistics. Others warned of a regional firestorm, pulling Iran and even Hezbollah into a widening theater. Rourke, when asked for his opinion, answered with a grim nod. Hit them again and harder, but not with bombs, with truth. He wasn't talking about leaflets or radio waves. He was talking about digital warfare. Operation Black Echo launched that night. No jets, no bombs, just silence, and then chaos. Cyber units infiltrated Houthi communications, disrupting their propaganda broadcasts, scrambling their drone coordination links, and leaking footage of their own commanders retreating from Ras Isa in the wake of the U.S. strike. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines, but it worked. For the first time since the operation began, Houthi broadcasts fell quiet. Their claims of civilian deaths were contradicted by leaked audio recordings of internal briefings, recordings CENTCOM quietly fed to Arabic-speaking journalists. The myth began to unravel. Still, it wasn't enough. 2 nights later, a U.S. drone patrol detected unusual movement near another oil facility under Houthi control, one not previously targeted. The feed showed armed men digging trenches and setting up what appeared to be a mobile radar station. "Another SAM site?" Shade asked as the footage froze on screen. "No," said Dice, voice low. "That's a missile launcher. They're preparing to strike something big." The coordinates confirmed their fears. The site was aimed east, toward Saudi Arabia, toward a major oil processing facility in Abqaiq. If the Houthis succeeded, the regional economy would be thrown into turmoil. And if Iran was involved, it meant a direct attack by proxy. There was no time for debate. Rourke issued the launch order, and once again, Shade and Dice suited up, this time joined by 2 other pilots flying electronic warfare support. The objective wasn't to destroy the entire compound. It was to eliminate the launcher before it could fire. They flew low, hugging the coastline under radar. As they neared the target, the outlines of the launcher came into view, a jagged shape among the sand dunes, surrounded by vehicles and armed personnel. "Target acquired," Shade said, locking in. "Weapons hot. 2 precision-guided bombs dropped cleanly. 1 struck. The launcher dead center. The other ignited a nearby ammo cache, sending flames 50 feet into the sky. No time to watch it burn. They peeled off, jets howling into the night. Back on the Eisenhower, the mood remained cautious. They had won another round. But this wasn't a war of battles. It was a war of will, perception, and attrition. Dice stared out over the sea after debrief. "We're not just fighting missiles," he said. "We're fighting a story they're trying to write about how the West came, bombed, and left chaos." Shade nodded slowly. "Then we rewrite the ending." In Washington, the president gave a short address. Calm, resolved. No triumphalism, just facts. "The United States will defend its forces, its allies, and the global commons. Let there be no doubt, those who escalate violence will face consequences, but we seek no war." But war has many faces. In Ras Isa, smoke still drifted over the ruins of what had once been a financial artery for the Houthi war effort. In underground bunkers across Yemen, new plans were surely forming. And on the bridge of the Eisenhower, Commander Rourke stared into the night, knowing it wasn't over. Not yet.